Good evening, everyone. It's great to see you here and a very, very happy holiday season. Welcome to another edition of Sea Stories, number 33. And we've got a very interesting guy joining us tonight. I'd like to introduce you to Tim Queeney, who's joining us all the way from Maine. Hello, Tim.
Hi guys, good to hear and see everybody.
You betcha. It's great to be here. Tim has written just a wonderful book called Rope. And you might read or might think, what on earth can we talk about with rope? And it's sort of everything from the beginning of fibers holding an axe head on a stick all the way up to the space elevator. So we've got a lot to talk about tonight, and we're really looking forward to it. Tim, I'm talking to you all the way up there in Maine. How are things up there?
Well, actually, it's pretty balmy day today. It was got all the way up to 41 degrees, so it was very nice.
That is balmy, pretty nice. Now, before we get going, ladies and gentlemen, we are running chat windows. And I see some of you have done this before. You've already begun. Um, if you click your chat window and if you would type in where you are signing on from, it'll give me a chance to see how things are working. So just take a moment. I will type Annapolis, Maryland in my box. And oh, somebody from Grenada. Hey, Jay. Isn't that cool? Now, you should be able to see that too. Am I right?
Yeah, yes.
Well, hello, Julian. Oh, isn't this fun? That's great. Well, welcome everybody. It's so great to have you here. Tim has graciously given us a little bit of time, and I wanted to first of all congratulate you. Tim has told me that the book has gone into a second printing now. That's
Just
very
for the holidays.
that's wonderful. Just in time, as they say.
Yeah, yes.
That's nice. Um, this book, as I read through it, has been extensively researched. I mean, I've lost count of how many people you interviewed, but it must have taken you an awful long time. Tell me a little bit about the idea that formed the book in the first place, and then how long it's taken you to pull all this information together.
Yeah, well, the idea actually came from not too strangely, it came from boats. We always had some boats growing up, and after my dad passed away a few years ago, my mom said, take all that rope, your dad's rope, and bring it back to Maine. I don't need it here." So I took several milk cartons full of rope back, and I used rope for various things around the house, and one day I pulled out a piece of rope and I needed it for something and it had a knot in it. And I was about to untie that knot when I suddenly realized, wow, my dad's fingers had tied that knot. And here he was in the world in three dimensions based on his own actions. And he sort of was with me at that moment. And I said, well, I can't untie that knot. So I put it up on the wall and started thinking about rope. And did a little bit of research and discovered that amazingly enough, no one had ever written a book about rope before. So, except for some very, very technical treatises, especially this one massive tome written by a British researcher back in, I think, the 1940s. But anyway, no one had written a sort of a popular level book about rope. So I got to work on that, and we got a publisher, and I basically spent really just about a year working on it because, as you know, a lot of the material in there is maritime based, and I have pretty a lot of experience with that as editor of Ocean Navigator magazine for quite a while. So I knew a little bit about maritime things. So that stuff I didn't have to research quite as deeply.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, I'm surprised you did it in a year, but the magic of the internet and communicating with people, uh,
Yes.
as opposed to having to actually go there.
Right. Right.
All right. Tim, you've ready to start a share with us?
Yes.
All right, my friends, here we
All right.
go.
Get
Remember,
started.
if you have any questions, we have a Q&A box running, and you can also type in the chat. I give you Tim Queenie.
Okay, well, this is our sort of our start screen here. This is mankind. I wrote one of mankind's most essential tools, and I really think that is not an overstatement. So let's go on here. but before I start talking about rope, I'll talk a little bit about me. As I just mentioned to Duncan, I always had boats around when I was growing up, and rope. That red rope on the left is actually a part of the main sheet to one of my dad's boats, a 32-foot Dickerson ketch that we had at one point. I've got that, and actually I cut it in half and I use it for different places around the house. And that's actually become that's become my demonstration rope that I use when I give talks. Um, so the boats, and then I was also editor of Ocean Navigator magazine for quite a long time, and that gave me quite a bit of background in things maritime and sailing, and I've done a bunch of offshore sailing, including through the Ocean Navigator School of Seamanship, wherein we taught a variety of navigation sort of based skills from celestial navigation to radar navigation to coastal piloting, that sort of thing. And you can see a picture of the Oliver Hazard Perry, the full rigged, ship rigged training vessel that's based out of Newport, and did some passages on that as well, and taught celestial navigation on that, along with a whole series of schooners that we did seminars aboard. And then we also taught celestial navigation ashore as well. And we actually were when we started it in the 90s, there were actually whole hotel meeting rooms full of people that actually wanted to learn celestial navigation. So we would teach 25, 30 people at a time. The last time I taught it was a few years ago, and I think there were only 5 people in the room. So things have changed in that department. So anyway, so that's sort of my background in rope, and I told the story about how I got the idea for rope, and so that's why I wrote a book about rope, which seems like to some people a strange thing to write a book about, but what of course you find, and when you dive into any topic like this, there's so much to cover. I couldn't even cover it all. I was given 75,000 words as a manuscript length by my publisher, and when I finished my first draft, it was 93,000 words. So I had to do a bit of cutting, although I managed to wrangle 5,000 more words out of them. So we came in at around 80,000, but I still had to cut 13,000. Uh, okay, so that's me. But let's ask the question, of course, well, why was rope important? Um, rope it's it played a significant role in early human development. On the left, you can see those folks from very long ago, prehistory. They are using rope to tie up packages and bundles and tie them aboard. For example, that travois that's on the back of that dog, and then they've got stuff tied to other dogs. So probably one of the first reasons why rope was important was because it just helped you organize your stuff. And even just like we have to organize things now, people back then needed to organize things as well and tie things in bundles. And rope was fantastic for that, and fantastic for tying up domesticated animals as well, so they didn't wander away. Another early use, of course, was as you alluded to, Duncan, you have arrowheads and spearheads made from flint and other hard materials, and that's a great thing. But it's not much use if you can't attach it to the shaft of either an arrow or spear shaft. And one way they could do that, of course, was to use sticky substance like pine tar, which you see the dark material there. But that doesn't pine tar is not strong enough to hold an arrowhead on when you actually are using it. So you need to lash that arrowhead on there. And you can see those arrowheads and that spearhead are lashed onto those shafts. And which raises the question of, well, is that rope? That looks more like cordage or string to me. But in fact, I used a very wide definition of rope for this book. As you'll see, we cover some of the other types of rope. It's all rope as far as I'm concerned. So I went wide. Then you also see the the build use of rope for in ancient by ancient peoples for building, and of course the most famous buildings that we know of are the pyramids. And those 2.5 ton blocks, you got to each the most of the pyramids, for example, the Great Pyramid is made mostly of 2.5 ton blocks. Uh, and there are lots of theories about how the pyramids were put together. We don't know exactly because the Egyptians didn't actually leave records. And there are lots of theories, as I say, the most prevalent being that they used ramps to bring the stones up to the various levels. There is a little bit of a problem with using ramps to build the Great Pyramid, for example, and the larger pyramids, and that is that the building of the ramp it becomes so long and large that eventually the building the ramp is more of a job than building the pyramid. So that's kind of a problem. But anyway, we still don't know. But one thing we do know is that if you have 1,000 workers trying to move a 2.5 ton block, they can't all move that block. They can't all get their hands on it to move the block. So having 1,000, 2,000 people to move a block isn't really very useful. But if you put a rope around that block and extend it out in front, you can use, or you can get all 1,000 people, all 500 people, however many you have, can all grab onto that rope and haul away and drag that block. So rope is really essential for that, and you can see that in that illustration. We can see some workers dragging a block with a sledge up the side of a ramp. So maybe they did use the ramps. Then over on the right, you see a model of the way the Egyptians actually used to build their vessels, while in the West, in sort of the European approach that we're used to, you build a vessel's hull by putting down a keel and then putting in ribs and then planking those ribs over. And that becomes the structure of the vessel. As far as the hull is concerned, that is not the way the Egyptians, for example, built boats. They actually would use planks, but they would cut these V-shaped grooves in the planks. You can sort of see that there. And then they would run rope through those grooves and basically lash the entire vessel together using rope. Uh, it could be either rope from papyrus or more likely it was a type of rope called halfa grass from halfa grass, which is a plant that grows very extensively along the Nile. And so the Egyptians would actually stitch these boats together, and they would put ribs in, but the ribs would go in after the whole hull structure was tied together as a way to stabilize the structure. So rope was a that and many other uses was a hugely important tool early on. So what about the earliest rope? How early do we have actually a sample of rope, a specimen of rope? Well, this is some photographs of a rope that was found in a cave in southeastern France by some researchers, and we could actually use the chat here. Who wants to guess how old this rope is? Anybody who hasn't read the book, see if you can guess how old this rope is. So anyway, so this rope is quite old. I'll just go on. We don't, and that might be be unwieldy to wait. But so well, we got one here saying 2,000 years. That's a very good guess, but a little light. You got to go deeper. Go way deeper than 2,000 years. But we got 18,000 years old, 2,500, 5,000. Everybody's being very conservative here. Then a 6,000,
There
no
we
one,
go.
10K. Okay. All right. So we're sort of going in the right direction. So let me hit this next slide and you'll see this actually a specimen of rope is 50,000 years old. It was found on this piece of flint in this cave in France, and it was stuck to the bottom of this flint flake that was they used a lot of flint, of course, to make various tools. And a lot of times the flakes weren't the right size or whatever, and they were discarded. This is looks like a discarded flake, and on the bottom, what is this piece of rope that actually is three strand. It's got three separate strands, and they are twisted using both Z and S twists. And I'll talk a little bit about what that is in a minute. But these are photographs that the researchers did made of this piece of rope, and they got the were able to determine its age with carbon-14 dating, and it's 50,000 years old. So what does that mean? It means that actually Neanderthal people were making rope, which is pretty amazing. And the researchers who found this rope in the paper that they wrote about it, they stipulated that this demonstrates that Neanderthals had abstract mathematical thinking, that they were able to keep track of how they twisted each strand and then how they twisted the three strands together into the final piece of cordage. So that's pretty amazing that people were that advanced. Our predecessors, the Neanderthals, were that advanced at that time. I'm going to go on to how do we actually put rope together? Well, of course, rope is starts out with strands of fiber, and in ancient times and going up to fairly recently in human history, this was all natural fiber from plant materials. Um, Back in as I said, that in the Egyptian times, they might have been using halfa grass to do these halfa grass um, fibers that they twisted into yarns, and then they twist the yarns were, and when you have a bunch of yarns, you then twist those yarns into strands, and then you twist the strands, three of them. You could use more, but the most common type of rope is three strand. Those strands are then twisted together into the final rope. And each time that you do this twisting, you go the opposite way that you did the first time. So the yarns can be twisted into strands by twisting to the right, and then you twist the strands together into the final rope by twisting to the left. So the two twists are actually, and you actually start at the lowest level. I'm sorry, is the fibers into the yarn. So you make twist to the right, to the left, and then to the right again as you go up in the structure. And what that does is that the twists work against each other, and they actually they hold together. Um, Let me go on, and I'll show you so here's our S and Z twists. The S twist is a left hand twist, and the Z twist is a right hand twist. So you either twist it to the left or to the right. And one of the ways this works also, in addition to the twisting and the friction that holds the rope together, there's also this helix effect. By having three strands, what you actually have is the strands form individual helixes that wrap around the other two strands. So you have three different helixes of strands they're all working together. And unfortunately, I can't do this that easily uh, through my camera here, which isn't that big. But if I were to take this rope and wrap it around my arm, around and around and around like this, and you'll note that I'm not stapling the rope to my arm. I'm not gluing the rope to my arm. I'm not riveting the rope to my arm. I'm just wrapping it around like this. And then if I pull on it like this from this angle, right in the same plane as as the helix is being done, you'll note that it's not attached to my arm at all, but it's not going anywhere. And that is because what happens is, as I pull on it, the helix collapses around my arm. And that's what happens with rope, is that each of the three helixes collapse around each other as you pull on it. And that's what sort of keeps the rope together and makes it strong. So that's those are the S and the Z twists. And I think I'm going to hand this back to Duncan, because I think we have a message.
This is a pitch to ask you to join us at the American Schooner Association. Founded in 1972, the American Schooner Association is dedicated to the history, preservation, and promotion of the schooner rig. You don't need to be a schooner owner to join the organization, just to be interested in these beautiful boats. As time marches forward, the role that schooners played in the history of our country is fading too. Your membership helps support educational programs and provides a base for preserving these vessels. So, join us. It's inexpensive, important, and we'd love to have you along. We'll see you at amschooner.net.
And we're coming up on our annual meeting. Oh, the excitement, the excitement. So if you join today, you can join us up in Mystic. Oh, boy. All right, we're back with Tim Queeney. We're talking about his wonderful book, Rope. And we've gotten up to S and Z twists after having visited with the Egyptians. And we're moving up along. What do you got, Tim?
Okay, well let's go back to that slide. So there are our S and Z twists. And of course, this is stranded rope, and as I said, the most common, most efficient way, most inexpensive way to have stranded rope and have this helix effect work the best is to use three-strand rope. So that was the most common type of rope made, but you can also make four-strand. I actually have some very nice four-stranded jute rope right here that is actually, it's hard to tell, but this is actually four strand, and you can make more higher levels of rope, and those were of stranded rope, and that can be, those are usually for more specialized reasons, and I'll go into that in a sec. But so let's move on, and we'll go back to the ancient Egyptians, and you'll see on the left, you'll see a illustration from a wall illustration from a tomb, Egyptian tomb, shows some two fellows actually making rope, working on the process of making rope. The pile of rope in the middle is actually a pile of Egyptian rope that was discovered in one of the boat pits that was discovered alongside the Great Pyramid, the first one being discovered in 1954. And in that boat pit was an entire disassembled vessel, more than 100 feet long, that the pharaoh was probably was intended for his use after in the afterlife. Interestingly enough, it was all in pieces, so he would have had to put it together. And there weren't any instructions that they found in there. So I guess the pharaoh got a crash course on boat building before he passed. But in that boat pit was this actual pile of rope, of three-strand rope. And if you look at that three-strand rope, that looks like the stranded rope that you could go and buy right now. But that's 4,500-year-old rope in there. And that was another thing that sort of prompted me to write this book. I came across this picture and I was just amazed me. I didn't had no idea that the rope making was that advanced and sophisticated at this time in history. It's pretty impressive. Uh, then, if we look to the right of that in that other illustration, it shows an Egyptian vessel, and of course, everyone involved in this organization knows quite a bit about boats, so they know that there's something called standing rigging, which rope was used for to hold the mast up. And then you have running rigging, which you use to actually control the sails. And then there was another interesting use of rope that the Egyptians used and continued to be used even by later people, such as the Greeks and the Romans, used something called an anti-hogging truss. And you'll see that there's some rope tied around the stern of the vessel, and then it goes up and goes through some supports. That rope goes through some supports and then goes forward and is tied around the bow. And they could tighten it around the mast, and they could make this basically this big piece of rope would act as a truss to prevent the bow and the stern from sagging or hogging, as the term's called in nautical the nautical world. Many people are probably familiar with that. So this was an anti-hogging truss. That was another way that rope was used, and it was a very important structural thing for the sort of the longevity of the vessel.
Tim, if you want to use your mouse, it'll show up on the screen, I think,
Oh
if,
yeah, okay,
if you want to point at things.
right. Oh good. So now I'll do a lot of pointing. This one of the I think for most of us who have read a lot of maritime history, sort of Western maritime history, the voyages of exploration, which are amazing. Uh, some people may not be as familiar with the Polynesian voyages that settled the Pacific, starting in Taiwan and then extending over thousands of years over the various parts of the Pacific and also into the Indian Ocean. And these are in my opinion, these are the most amazing voyages made by humans because they were done with very sophisticated observational navigational techniques. They weren't using the mechanical, scientific approach that the Western explorers used. They were just simply looking and observing their environment from the stars to the sea life that they observed to the cloud formations to even things like they were such great observers of the of formations of the waves on the ocean. They could actually tell from the way the waves were being diffracted around an island that was not even visible. It was maybe over the horizon, and but they could see how the waves were being refracted around that island. So that's pretty amazing, and it's just an example of how impressive humans can be when they just observe their environment very closely and note all these various things. Uh, this vessel here is not really an example of the type of voyaging canoes that the Polynesians used. This is more of a coastal canoe, but what's valuable to look at here is the way this canoe is all lashed together. They used coconut fiber rope that they got from the husks of coconuts and made rope out of it, and they would actually lash the various parts of the vessel together instead of using nails or even wooden pegs. It was almost all lashing. And of course, they also used the rope the way that Western sailors did, in that they used it for standing rigging and for running rigging. So this is this is an example of rope used to perform this really absolutely amazing example of open ocean voyaging. But then we move on to the age of sail, and here we can see a diagram of a ship from the 1720s. And as we all know, these vessels were absolutely covered with a spider's web of various rope to make so they could be operated, both using rope for this again the standing rigging. These ratlins are all standing rigging, and you also have you've got stays and going between the masts, so that's all standing rigging, and then you have a quite a bit of running rigging, like these lifts here. Then you've got braces for controlling the yard arms. So there's a tremendous amount of rope required just to operate this vessel. And as the age of sail it sort of exploded in the 17th and well actually 16th, 17th and 18th and 19th century, early 19th centuries, when sail was the primary motive force. Uh, all these vessels required tremendous amounts of rope in order. So rope became an absolutely essential and in fact a strategic material. The hemp that was used to make this rope, um, for example, for the British Royal Navy, almost all of it came from Russia. So Russia became in Ukraine, the Ukraine area, that was a major producer of hemp plants, and the hemp fibers were used to make rope. So that became a strategic material, and alongside pitch from pine trees, and then the actual trees themselves to use for masts. So the pitch and resin from trees, the masts, and then the hemp were three strategic naval materials that were called naval stores, and were something that, for example, the Royal Navy, with its since they had the largest Navy all through the age of sail, they needed a tremendous amount of naval stores, and were always looking for new sources of naval stores. Of course, when the United States was a British colony, trees for masts came from North America, and the British also attempted to get American colonists to grow hemp so they could use that to make rope. And there was a lot of hemp growing along the Merrimack River and along the Connecticut River early on. And the British Parliament actually passed a law where they would pay bounties for people to grow hemp, farmers to grow hemp, so that they could use it for making rope. A lot of the hemp that was grown never made it back to Britain, however, because it was actually used to make rope in the colonies. So that attempt didn't really work. Um, and so the British were very reliant on Russian hemp, and a lot of the rope that was made in the colonies and the early United States also they used a great deal of Russian hemp. In fact, it was such an important strategic material that one of the reasons that Napoleon, for example, in 1812 invaded Russia was to cut off the supply of hemp to the Royal Navy, so he could weaken the Royal Navy because they wouldn't have hemp to make rope for their vessels. So that's how important hemp and rope was for these vessels. And so because you have to make all this rope, the industrialization of the process was huge. In fact, there's some because and taking the Royal Navy as an example, uh, the Royal Navy had such a huge amount of ships to build, masts to acquire and put into ships, and then rope to make to rig them. That some nautical history writers have made the point that the Royal Navy dockyard network, where all this maintenance of the construction and maintenance of the fleet took place, was really the one of the kickstarters of the Industrial Revolution in Great Britain. That this was the first that the Royal Navy dockyards were the first sort of industrial enterprise in Great Britain during this era. Uh, there's still a Royal Navy. Well, I'm sure there's still a rope manufacturing facility in the UK that you can visit it at the Chatham dockyard, and they still make some rope there, although not really for the Royal Navy. It's more for dog collars and leashes and stuff like that. But they're still making rope. But and this and there that rope walk is 1,100 feet long. And one of the reasons why you need such a long building to make rope in is that you form the yarn and then the fiber. You form the fibers and then the yarn and then the strands. But when you put the strands together to make rope, you're twisting those strands, and it actually the rope that you make ends up being shorter than what you started the materials, the strands you started out with. It actually shortens the final rope. The final rope is shorter because it's all twisted. Um, and so, but you need a long building to start the process. So the Royal Navy, the rope walk in Chatham, for example, is 1,100 feet long. Uh, and the reason why they picked that was because after the twisting, the final rope that was finished was around 760 feet long. And that was the required length for anchor roads for Royal Navy vessels, that they all had to have 760 feet of anchor roads so that they could anchor in certain depths of water. Um, so this picture is a picture the uh, from the Plymouth Cordage Company that was in Plymouth, Massachusetts. And this is an example of their rope walk that was 1,200 feet long, and it operated into around the middle towards the end of the 19th century. They were still making rope here. Um, and what happened was that at some point at the end of the 19th century, early 20th, the rope walk was shut down, and then the cordage company needed the space to build new buildings. So uh, the part of the building was taken down. A quarter of it was taken down and taken apart and sent and eventually ended up in Mystic at the Mystic Seaport. So if you go to Mystic Seaport in Connecticut and visit there, you'll see there's a rope walk, which is actually a pretty long building, but it's actually only a quarter of the length of the actual rope walk from which it came. And this is an example of that rope walk. a picture of the inside of that rope walk. And of course, the question arises, why is it called a rope walk? Well, because as the workers were making the rope, they'd have to go walk up and down the length of this. And in fact, the guys in Chatham use bicycles to ride back and forth inside the building because it's such a long building. It takes too long to walk from one end to another. And the initial making of the yarn is very similar to making yarn for knitting. If anyone does any knitting, if you make your own yarn, spin your own yarn, you put the fibers, the raw fibers on those twisting hooks, those spinning hooks, and as you put the fibers on there, it spins them into the yarn. And what would happen was that the workers at the rope walk would have a bundle of these fibers around their waist, and they would feed them in, and then slowly feed in more fibers, and they'd walk backwards down the rope walk to make the initial yarn. And then from the yarns, they would then, of course, make the strands, and then they would make the final rope. So that's why it's called a rope walk. Rope is also used for communication. But before we go into that, I think Duncan has another message for us.
I walked into the galley to see what delights Asa was cooking, and immediately became suspicious as the unmistakably sweet smell of rum became evident. Any question regarding the sobriety of our cook was quickly settled as I looked into the large pot on the stove. There, amongst the onions and tomatoes, were a number of live gruntfish swimming around in circles. Under the influence of the rum, Asa had been putting the fish live into the pot. Talk about fresh! The fish stew was canceled that night, but old Asa went on to prepare many more great ones.
We're back with Tim Queeney, and we're talking about rope. And we've just been taking a nice look at the Plymouth Rope Walk, and there's a lot more to go. So take it away, my friend.
Okay, so let's go back to our example of rope being used for communication. And this is in the middle image here. It's hard to see detail because the cordage is fairly light. But this is a quipu that the Inca people, and I see that someone mentioned in the chat here, INCA, not INKA. Well, actually, the people who research quipu would disagree with you on that. They spell it INKA, and I spoke to a fellow named Matty Medrano, who's a PhD student. Actually, he may actually have his PhD now at Harvard, and he is an expert on quipu, and he spelled it that way. So I'm going with Matty. But you're right that it did used to be spelled INCA. That's what we all learned in school. But so this is an example of a quipu here. And what is a quipu? Well, a quipu has this. If you look to the right, you'll see there's a horizontal rope. And then from that horizontal rope, you'll see that there are vertical ropes that hang from it. And those ropes are knotted, and they're knotted with 4 different types of knots. And the location of the knot and the type of knot will actually presents information to the person who is reading the quipu. And what I've been told by what Maddie told me is that it's actually you actually don't read the quipu using your eyes so much as your fingers. You actually run your fingers down each length, and you can get very good at sensing the knots and where they are, and from that you can determine what number is being encoded into the rope. And using this system, of course, the Incans could send census information, and we believe it was harvest information and agricultural info to the capital and to various parts of the empire on the very extensive Incan roads that the Incans built. And runners would stuff the quipu in their pocket, and they'd go off and run 10 miles to the next station and hand the quipu to somebody else, and someone would take it on. Um, so unfortunately, we don't know, we can't decipher all of the quipu that still exist. There is no Rosetta Stone right now for all the quipu that we have. Um, the Spanish conquistadors unfortunately burned quite a few of the quipu, and they may indeed have destroyed a translation device that's now out of our hands. But another quipu researcher that I talked to, she's convinced that quipu were used not only for mathematical information, for census data and agricultural data, but also for actually telling stories for narrative use. And she's done quite a bit of research along those lines, and she's convinced, she thinks she supposes that there is, she's done from some of her research, she believes that there may be a translation uh, records written down somewhere in the Spanish archives, and so she's still avidly searching for that, and hopefully she'll find it, and we'll be able to decipher more of these quipu. She also told me that the quipu are still being made in the Andes, and even to this day, and they've taken on because of the Christianization of South America, they've taken on Christian meaning as well as some of the older meanings, and many people who in the high Andes, local people in some of the smaller villages are often have a quipu made for them, and they're buried with that quipu. And this practice was seen more during, as for example, the COVID outbreak when COVID did kill many people in the mountains. And they also have a some great legends about uh, zombies in the Andes, and supposedly the zombies require having a quipu with them in order for them to move. So if you ever are being chased by a zombie in the Andes, if you snatch the quipu out of his hands, he'll suddenly stop and he won't be able to chase you. So that's pretty valuable info. Um, the Incans were not the only people to use knotted string for communication and for moving data. Um, the idea of the quipu was actually invented by an earlier civilization than the Incans. The Incans picked up on that and expanded its use, and it was also used by many other cultures around the world, Southeast Asia, in Africa, and in North America. Some Native Americans used quipu-like devices as well for encoding data. So it seems to be a pretty universal human approach to keeping track of data as opposed to writing, or in addition to writing. Uh, Now, rope is also an absolutely essential element in building, not only for the pyramids, but further on into history. Both the Romans used, the Greeks and the Romans made extensive use of cranes, and something called a treadwheel crane, which you can see over here. Here's the treadwheel. The operator stands inside and walks like a gerbil, and this whole device rotates. And what that does, of course, is it takes up the rope on the spindle, and that pulls uh, the load up to the higher level, and so you can lift things with the treadwheel crane. The Romans used them extensively, and there's actually a tomb in Rome that has some relief carved into it, and on that relief there is actually a treadwheel crane with 5 people inside working it. So that's pretty amazing. They must have had some serious lifting power. For the use of rope for the treadwheel cranes was extensively used in the Middle Ages for the building of the great cathedrals of Europe. Um, Treadwheel cranes were started out on the ground, and then they would disassemble the crane and move it up to higher levels of the walls and up into the towers as they progressed. And in fact, there are still cathedrals in Europe that still have their treadwheel cranes up in the towers. They once they finished the cathedral, they basically left the treadwheel crane up there, both for bringing materials up for possible future repairs, and also because it would take time and money to disassemble the thing and send it back down. So they just left it up there. Um, the another way that rope was essential for the building of these cathedrals was in the use of you putting these poles together into scaffolding, and instead of using nails or wooden pegs to put the scaffolding poles together, they would lash them together and lash the corners together, and then they would drive a wooden wedge into the final tight lashing to make it even tighter. So these were very tight and very usable for lifting, putting big loads on, and putting workers on to build the walls. And you'll see in this illustration, there's only a section of scaffolding here, and that's not an example of just showing you a piece of a massive amount of scaffolding. These buildings were not built by completely encasing the building as it was being built in scaffolding. So there was scaffolding everywhere. They didn't actually do that for two reasons. Primarily, one was that the poles used for the scaffolding were actually expensive. They had to gather these poles and debranch them and get nice straight ones, and they wanted to preserve these, and so they didn't want to damage them by using nails or anything like that. Uh, so it wasn't completely encased. Each portion of the building was built using a section of scaffolding, and when they finished that section, they would disassemble the scaffolding and move it to the next section and continue on. So just because they just sort of they didn't want to spend the money on all the poles necessary to completely encase the building. And the second reason they didn't do that, and you can see that this piece of this section of scaffolding has poles that go down and rest on the already existing walls that have already been built, and they don't go all the way to the floor. And why is that? Well, they did that for a reason, to keep the floors open, because these from the very beginning of the building of these buildings, of these cathedrals, they were used for religious services and also for civic use. There was an example of the in London, the St. Paul's Cathedral, the old St. Paul's that was destroyed in the 1666 fire. That had they actually there was a case of a horse fair being held inside the cathedral, and I guess a lot of people complained about all the things that the horses left behind. And so the king at the time, I think it was Henry II, gave an order that no more horse fairs in the cathedral. We're going to cut that out. So they would they would build sections at a time, and they would actually it would actually hold up against the walls and keep the area below clear, so they could actually use the buildings from the very beginning. Sometimes even before the roofs were put on. So that was the use of rope for buildings for cathedrals, which was extensive. And then we got wire rope, uh, uh, which of course is very similar to natural fiber rope, but it's made out of strands of iron or steel. And it was originally developed in the mining district of the Harz Mountains in Germany, because this one engineer realized that rather than using chains or natural fiber rope, which broke, and sometimes the chain would break because a single link would break, he said, if I replace the natural fiber with strands of iron, then you could have it's much more forgiving of a few strands breaking. The rope doesn't lose all of its strength. So he started building wire rope, and wire rope today is still made of individual strands, much like the stranding of natural fiber rope. Uh, this is an example of, some of you may remember this, Philippe Petit, the high wire artist who walked between the World Trade Center towers in 1974, August 7th, 1974. And he did this all surreptitiously, of course. He was arrested by the New York Police Department after he finished, and they actually pulled the wire back across and all of these support guy wires, and assembled it all and gave it back to Philippe Petit, which I'm not so sure they would do that today. But anyway, one of the highlights of the book was that I got a chance to talk to Philippe by a FaceTime. I did a FaceTime with him, which was really fun. He's 74 years old now, and or he was when I talked to him. And I asked him, Philippe, do you still go up on the wire? And he said, "Oh yes, I just came down 2 hours ago." He has the one half of this wire that he used, this cable is half of it is in at his home in upstate New York, and all summer, spring, and fall he walks on the wire. Um, and I said, Philippe, you were 1,350 feet in the air. Were you scared? And he said, well, it was very frightening, but I wasn't scared. So that was a very Philippe Petit answer. Uh, of course, when he did this, he actually lay down on the wire and sat on the wire, lay down on the wire. It's the guy was amazing. I'm convinced that he has a special, highly developed inner ear with more of the inner sensing cilia hairs inside his ears that allow him to do these amazing things. And I actually put that to him. I said, Philippe, is it possible that you have an unusually well-developed inner ear that gives you the balance to do this? And he said, no, 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 no. It's just a matter of will. If you want to do it, you can. I, I said, okay. No, I don't think I'm doing that. Okay, so let's move on. We got rope tricks. Here's cordage to entertain. Here's some rope some rope being used up in the I took this picture way up in the upper reaches of the fly area behind the stage, above the stage at the Booth Theater, and you can in New York City on Broadway, and you can see this is some natural fiber rope, three-strand rope that's still being used to haul materials up into the fly space. A lot of the theaters, in fact, this theater, the Booth as well, makes use of this aircraft cable, which is wire rope for most of the lifting, but they still use some three-strand rope for their use. Here's a guy doing a rope trick with rope, so that we can move on. And then here is the famous Indian rope trick, a picture of this, and the Indian rope trick is something that there are historical accounts of it, of people who supposedly saw this happen in the medieval times in both India and in China. And it goes along the lines of a magician sends a rope up into the air, and the rope goes so high up into the air that you can't see it. And he tells his young boy assistant to climb the rope, and the assistant climbs the rope, and he goes up so high that you can't see him. And the meanwhile, the magician's waiting for the boy to come back down. He doesn't come back down. The magician looks at his watch, gets a little angry. Maybe he didn't have a watch. Maybe he looked at his sundial. And then he climbs the rope with a knife in his teeth, and he disappears. The magician disappears. And then we see pieces of the boy come down, his arm, a leg, his torso come down and then hit the ground. And the magician comes back down again, and he arranges the pieces of the boy, kicks him, and the boy stands up and bows to the audience. Uh, Now, of course, there's some question as to whether this actually happened. But in the 1890s, the Chicago Tribune ran a story about this, about two young Americans who were traveling in India and actually observed this and supposedly even took pictures. And this went out, and it was sort of a filler piece for that day's edition, and yet it was picked up by newspapers in the United States and, in fact, all over the world. This story was rerun everywhere, and the Chicago Tribune about 2 weeks later, way into the back of one of the day's editions, there was a small a small correction saying, "Oh, by the way, that story we ran about the Indian rope trick, we made that up." So, so probably the Indian rope trick is probably more apocryphal than anything else. So let's move on. We just have a couple more left here. Rope for science. Rope is being used even today in this neutrino detector at the South Pole, the ice cube array, which uses the rope and these optical sensors, which can actually detect when a neutrino goes coming through the ice, hits the ice in just in a certain way, and it actually gives off a blue flash, which is called Cherenkov radiation, and the detectors can detect that. And based upon how what the geometry is of the flash, they can actually determine where the neutrino came from, which is pretty amazing. And those are all those detectors are all hanging on long, extremely long lengths of rope. The landing of the rovers on Mars would have been impossible without rope. There were in two ways it was used. One was for the shroud lines for the supersonic parachutes that did the initial slowing down of, or actually the initial was a heat shield. The secondary slowing down of the spacecraft as it goes through the Martian atmosphere, then that was jettisoned, and the famous sky crane, you may have remembered it at the time, the sky crane, which was a device with four rockets on it that could actually hover over the surface, and then the lander was lowered to the surface using Vectran rope. And when it got to the surface, there were special cutters that cut the rope, and the sky crane flew off and crashed somewhere else. But those landings were impossible without rope, and it was really fun talking to the guy who actually designed the supersonic uh, parachute, and he's now had I think something like 7 or 8 landings on Mars. He's designed 7 or 8 of these parachutes, so he's the go-to expert for supersonic Martian parachutes. And then we'll move on to finally the space elevator, which is an example of the use of something that might be future rope. And this seems totally insane and crazy and impossible, but in fact, the physics of it are fairly well established, and it will work. What you attach a tether to the surface of the Earth, and all of you who are celestial navigation users know that the Earth rotates at the equator. Any point on the equator is moving 900 miles an hour. So if you attach something at the equator and then you send that tether up into space, and you have a weight at the other end, 100,000 kilometers up, that weight will be the same as if you attached a stone to the end of a piece of rope and you spun yourself around in a circle. That rope will be held, that stone will be held by the rope, and the rope will become straight and tight. And that's exactly what will happen here. As the Earth spins, that weight spins around at very high speed because of the huge arc that it's moving at, the huge circle that it's inscribing, and that tether becomes bar tight. And you can then send a crawler such as this, in this artist conception, a crawler going up the tether. It crawls up the tether until it gets up to orbital height. For example, geosynchronous, 23,000 miles up. You open the doors and push the satellite out, and now your satellite's in geosynchronous orbit, and it didn't require any rockets to do that. And rockets are great, but they do pollute the upper atmosphere quite a bit. And this system would allow you to put much more uh, weight of material into space, much less expensively than using rockets. The only thing that's held this back so far is just the tether, the ability to make a tether strong enough to do this. You need something around 90 gigapascals in strength, tensile strength, to a material that can handle that level of strength to do it. Structural steel is down around 17 gigapascals, so it's not nowhere close to being able to do it. But there is a new material called graphene that scientists have been working on, and engineers. And this graphene has been tested up to 120 gigapascals, so it theoretically can do the job. And the only one of the drawbacks, of course, is that you have to manufacture a piece of tether that's 100 100,000 kilometers long, which is kind of a big manufacturing challenge. And the longest length I believe is a kilometer so far they've made of this stuff. So they got a ways to go. But I talked to a former NASA rocket scientist and an industrial um, chemist from the UK, and they both are members of the International Space Elevator Consortium, and they are convinced that this will be built in the future, and it will be the way that we get a lot of material up into space to go to Mars, return to the moon, and possibly go to Mars. And I think we are, yeah, that's it. That's it for the presentation. Thank you for listening.
Hey, that was wonderful. Tim, thank you so much. You know, the one thing I remember about the graphene rope you were talking about, it's atoms thick,
Yes, yes,
atoms thick.
yeah,
And one of the things that struck me is that if a plane flew into it, it'd probably just cut the plane in half.
yeah. It would cut the plane in half. Yeah. So they're planning to put it in a place about 1,000 miles off the coast of Ecuador, where right along the equator, where there are no storms because of course storms because of the Coriolis effect they tend to bend away from the equator. I mean they always do. No storm ever crosses the equator, and there are also no commercial airline flights. So this is the perfect place to put it in on out in the ocean on a platform, and the platform will have dynamic positioning so that any space debris that's about to big pieces of space debris that might hit the tether, they can actually move it around and
My
avoid the
God.
space debris.
Okay. I think I'd worry that the station would get picked up by the counterweight. But anyway,
Yeah. Well, they've actually the idea is to make it so that it's the center of gravity is halfway up.
yeah, of
So it's
course.
all the weight isn't on the bottom or on the
Of
top.
course.
I'm not
Ladies
quite
and
sure how they do
gentlemen, we have a little bit of time to ask Tim Queeney some questions. If you have any questions or comments, type them in. We're here for a little bit longer. And Tim, that was a wonderful presentation. What an interesting book that must have been to make.
Yeah, it was really fun, and I didn't even go into the synthetic fibers of
Yeah,
nylon and polyester and Kevlar and how those things are developed. Because
it's
because
one of
well,
my
actually,
favorite.
you have to buy the book to read
Yeah,
that.
and one of my favorite chapters actually. So I
Mm,
love that.
yeah.
All right, looks like everybody's enjoyed it. That's a good thing. Let's see. Oh, we're back to the very first Q&A question. Some said there are no ropes on a sailing boat, only lines, but of course, someone else told me, oh no, there are 5 ropes on a sailboat. The bolt rope, the bell rope, and 3 more. Does anyone know the other 3? I know one of them is the man rope on the gangplank, but
Oh, there you go.
uh,
Yeah.
I,
Well, a lot of people have made the point that they say that there are no ropes on a sailing vessel, only lines. But one thing is that the nomenclature of line comes about once a piece of rope has a job. So when you're bringing the rope on board, it's rope. Once it's assigned to a job, it's either a sheet, a main sheet, or a jib sheet, or a halyard. Then it has a name and a job, and it's a line.
exactly. It comes on as rope and it moves out. You've got one quick question from Eric Russell down there in the chat. Does
Oh, I
graphene
see.
share the same synthetic systematic problem of being very slippery as Dyneema?
That's a very good question, and I believe it does have that problem of being very slippery, um, and so that's a huge challenge for anybody who's attempting to build a space elevator is how to actually anchor it to the base, your floating base in the ocean, and I actually put that question to um, to my 2 interviewees, and they neither of them could really answer that. That's one of the things they're working on is how to actually get it to connect to the base. And in addition to being very slippery, as you point out, it's also oddly enough, it's also extremely reflective. So it would look this tether, which would be about a meter wide, as it goes up into space, it would look like a mirror going up into space. It would be very
Amazing.
strange.
Isn't that something? All right, my friends, we have pretty much reached the end of our presentation. Tim, I want to thank you so much for the time you spent with us. And oh, we have one more quick one. Why is right-hand rope so much more popular than left-hand rope?
That's a good question. I have to be completely honest and say I don't know the answer to that question.
That's an
That's something for
honest
me to
answer.
that's something I had to I'll have to research a little bit more. But
Well, you know,
I did not know that it was more popular. So
it's
that's
probably the same reason that coffee mugs read on one side. It's
oh
because
yeah.
most people are right-handed.
Yeah, right. Right. Probably.
Oh my goodness. Well, thanks so much again. The book is Rope. It is a terrific read, and I hope you all can pick up a copy and help support Tim in his habit.
Well, great. Thanks for having me, and thank you everybody for tuning in. I'm glad people enjoyed it. As you can tell, I a little bit of a rope nerd and can go on quite a long time about this.
Well, that's okay. We totally get that, and rope nerding happens. It's all good. I want to thank you all very much for joining us. Happy holidays, and Merry Christmas if you're of that ilk. And we will look forward very much to seeing you next time on Sea Stories.